Before we get started, from now until May 22nd, I am running a giveaway for a free signed copy of The Littlest Elephant by Catherine Applegate. Follow the link in the description and subscribe there to enter. Must be within the United States to be eligible to win. And thank you for listening. Welcome to the Book Fair Podcast. My name is Anthony, and this show is all about the freedom to read and children's literature. This week, we have an interview with Dr. Sanjay Juneja, author of We Need to Talk About Cancer, an important book for patients, family, and friends. Next week, we will have another episode covering the newest book releases and the latest news impacting schools, libraries, and children's literature, as well as another interview next Friday. Make sure you follow the podcast wherever you are currently listening to stay up to date with the latest news for young readers and librarians. Now, let's begin with this week's interview. Good morning, Dr. Sanjay Juneja. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your time. It's always wonderful to be able to sit down with people who are coming from such diverse professional backgrounds. Like, this is my first time talking with someone who has a medical background. Could you start off, Dr. Juneja, just introducing yourself for the audience and the work we'll be discussing today?
Yeah, my name is Sanjay Juneja. I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist, which just really means a blood specialist and cancer specialist down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My wife and I are both actually hemonc doctors and have been practicing in the community for about 5 or 6 years. And then I'm also known on social media as like the Onc Doc, where I've been kind of teaching these cancer concepts that are otherwise quite scary and intimidating to try and get, a little empowerment because I just believe that things are a little less scary when they're better understood. But I did all my training at Louisiana State University. I'm starting a master's in medical informatics at Stanford this summer, and I'm just trying to, navigate the seas of a complex disease process, but I want it democratized. So that's kind of where the world wills me, I feel like.
And you said that you're going into a master's program, so you're continuing your education even though you are a doctor?
I am a glutton for punishment. Yes, I'm triple board certified and have gone, through med school, but it's my first time going back to school after I think 7 years since my chief fellow year.
And just this week, Dr. Juneja, a book has recently been released that is your debut book. Can you talk a little bit about We Need to Talk About Cancer?
Yeah. So we need to talk about cancer came at first, even before it was, really kind of stamped in as a book idea, just from a lot of the conversations I was having with patients in Louisiana. I had plenty that aren't medical, so I oftentimes found myself using metaphors that sometimes came from like Harry Potter, like an invisible cloak, to talk about immune therapy, or to talk about video games when it came to the way that targeted therapy works. And in the process of having these analogies and these metaphors, you start reusing them for certain audiences based on their background. And at one point, my wife made an interesting observation. She's like a breast and female tumors cancer doctor, and she's like, Sanjay, it's sad because a lot of these patients of ours have kids our age. We have 10, 8, and 5-year-old all boys. And she's like, but it's sad that they're not allowed to come into the visit because a lot of times in an adult clinic, they carry illnesses and germs that are a little unique or newer variants than the ones that adults have been exposed to. And obviously, our patients are immune compromised because a lot of times we're giving them therapies that make them subject to getting a germ or an illness. And my point in saying all that is, it's sad because like they know something's going on with their parent. They're seeing oftentimes big changes either from the disease itself or from the treatment. And, there's not a lot of stuff directed to them. They get commercials talking about, immune therapy and ask your doctor about this drug, but where can they get answers about what's going on with their parent, let alone how to manage, the feelings and questions and what they feel allowed to ask and say or not allowed to ask and say, and how they need to be, as a kid to the parents. Like there's just all this stuff that just makes you really hurt or sad when you think about it that is not delivered, for something where somebody's looking at, who knows, potentially, believing they might lose their parent in some unknown period of time.
And so, from this idea of being able to communicate how to handle these feelings, as well as the process and kind of the understanding of cancer and cancer treatment, that was kind of what spurred the idea behind the writing of We Need to Talk About Cancer and this series from Neon Squid, where it is talking about serious topics and it is addressing them for young readers. You said that you worked on social media, so you kind of already had a little bit of experience with communicating big ideas to a more general audience. Can you talk about what approach you went with when it came time to start writing down the text for We Need to Talk About Cancer?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is, I believe that as complex as topics or subjects can be, that, once you understand them really well, like they should be, if you understand it well, they should be able to be explained to, a fourth or fifth grader. But doing it accurately is challenging. Which is why I waited, probably 6, 7 years out of my since my chief fellow year, to make sure these metaphors were at least, durable and correct. And then the second part of that was just make them just very understandable. Use real world stuff where they don't have to have a medical background or medical, words or knowledge. I've said this to patients a lot also, so that's kind of a unique part of the book. Is I have plenty of patients that want to read it for themselves, just because that way they can use these analogies to be able to understand, immune therapy and chemotherapy and targeted therapy, and just how much these things, differ. What do they mean? Because communities in cancer are very tight. So you get a lot of stuff on Facebook groups and newsletters, and you hear about other people's experiences. And I think that's where sometimes the challenge comes, because you really have to appreciate how they're all different processes and all the different situations are different. So this book is designed to say, let's frame what we're looking at. These are the things that matter. That way, you know what to ignore, what to identify with, and what to use as your measuring stick. And doing that on social media has helped, because I'm used to doing, fun little videos. I did one with like a pool table, like billiards, to explain CAR T therapy, which is otherwise a pretty technically fancy therapy, but it's very easy conceptually to understand. So doing all of that for a long period of time made it fairly easy to be able to kind of find the best ones to surface. And yeah, so that's where it came from, and it felt familiar. And I vetted it through a lot of different friends, their kids, my kids, etc., and hopefully it gives some people some value.
And at the very beginning of the book, one of the first things that you cover is that cancer isn't one particular thing. It can affect different parts of the body and it can express itself in different ways. Was that something that when it came time to, not just in this book, but in other forms on social media, expressing information or trying to communicate different information, making sure that you're accurately describing something that is so broad and covers so many different pathways?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, stage 4 means very different things depending on what the cancer is, right? Like, if it's a blood cancer, for example, we don't think of staging with blood cancer the same way as we do with what's called solid cancers like breast, lung, etc. So people are, still going for curative intent in a stage 4, but somebody might tell them, "You're mistaken, you're wrong, you misunderstood, this is gonna take your life," etc., and that's just incorrect. And then stage 4 melanoma now is curable, with non-chemo. So again, there's a lot of these things that correctly in decades past had some kind of idea of what they entailed or meant. But now in today's world with all these therapies, stage 4, some of them are getting cured, and then some of them are still aggressive at stage 2. So it explaining all of that is very important. Another big dangerous thing that I found on social media, and I'll say I think that's where I learned the points to talk about, because I got so much feedback, right? I had hundreds and thousands of comments over years. I think I've in total across all platforms like 1 million followers. And I would get a very good idea of what was thought to be the case, what may be correct, what may be incorrect. And one of those is that, well, I don't have to worry about screening because it doesn't run in my family. But cancer, 90% of the cancer cases in America are not from a genetic mutation or a gene that you inherited. 90% are cancers that form during your life, and about 5 to 10% at best are I can't even say passed down, so to speak, because plenty of people have these mutations that don't get cancer. But that's the point. Is like I'm sure a fifth grader or an eighth grader is wondering, like, am I going to get this? Is this something that I'm destined for 20 years from now? And they'll be like, oh, whoa, I didn't realize, it's actually something during a lifetime. So that's kind of how the book starts, and then maybe placate some upfront fears or misconceptions, and then really talks about the nerdy stuff because you could lose trust, right? If your family member is saying everything's going to be fine, like I have a good chance of cure, etc., and you're seeing them literally lose weight and be sick and lose their hair in front of you, you may doubt that they are saying that they're on their way to getting better because they look 10 times sicker than before they started therapy. So I explain, well, this is why they look like that. And then this is why it's necessary, but how, this is the timeline when you can expect them to get better. And so now it kind of frames things and I think builds trust both between the parent and the child, as well as, with medical teams and the patient, because sometimes a patient may not know that they're, going to feel bad during this period, even though the cancer itself is improving. So all this stuff that just doesn't make logical sense. How can you put that down into a book in 60 pages to just basically explain the what, the why, the how?
And the book does cover a lot of misconceptions, and it also demystifies a lot of information. A lot of people hear the word cancer and it has this weight to it, this kind of sting to it as something that is terminal or life-threatening. And one of the statistics that I didn't even know about came from the section talking about children who are diagnosed with cancer, which was that 9 in 10 individuals diagnosed with cancer at a young age end up living full lives after treatment.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, that's striking. Like, it's like we've really done a good job with pediatric cancers and kids, and they're just so admirably tough and resilient. Uh, One, they're able to tolerate therapies that are a little harder hitting, and one may say, well, why do therapies have to hit so hard? And that's because I talk, a good bit about how cancer is your normal cell in a sense that just went abnormal, right? So how do you attack something that looks, smells, breathes like you do? You take advantage of things that make it different from your normal cells. One being that it replicates fast. So if you do therapies that hit the replication process, the stuff that replicates gets injured in the process temporarily. Your hair cells are fast, your skin cells, so people get hair changes, skin changes, bone marrow changes, but because kids can tolerate a lot, and there's been a ton of research, St. Jude has been just remarkable in this aspect. Yeah, 9 out of 10 kids are cured of their cancers, which is just such a humbling, astonishing thing to say.
And even outside of the 9 out of 10 wonderful statistic that many people may not know, the book also does cover when things are not looking as hopeful, when people are going through treatment and they are seeing, as you said, the hair loss, the weight loss, they're looking worse, and sometimes even in the cases of death, where people are not able to overcome cancer through treatment. And the book ends on after that, the book ends on talking about the advancements in research, treatment, and technology. Can you talk about just kind of contextualizing that even though, as we said, there are 9 out of 10 people who are diagnosed as children who end up being cured, there is still a lot of work to be done, and, how are you seeing that play out in the medical field as a doctor yourself?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important, you know, point or topic, and that's that for the first couple of years into practice, when you said certain statistics, which are just statistics, right? I mean, it's just percentage odds. They were based on retrospective, meaning the stuff that happened in the past, and based on the expectations of what you then, based on those numbers, would expect to happen. But what happened in the last 2 or 3 years is, I would argue a good oncologist would tell you with an asterisk, this is the case if everything stopped when it came to innovation, new drugs, new therapies, new scientific understanding. The rate at which new therapies, and I mean non chemotherapies, not the ones that are general chemo that you put into your vein, the rate at which they're coming out and the rate at which the guidelines are having to update is so insanely fast in the last 5 to 10 years compared to the 40 years before it that a lot of times with some stage 4 cancers, I frame it to the patient and the family like, look, this treatment's supposed to last 18 to 24 months before we even need to talk about the second one. And I'm like, and it would be silly to talk about the second and third one and those survivals or those responses because who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's a factual statement because in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had some insane um, therapies come out that have completely shaken up the way you think about the likelihood of a good response or how long somebody stays alive and well. And that's just really neat and humbling that, that we need to be reminded that let's find out what the treatment of today, how long, and how far that should get us, and then reevaluate with a new list of circumstances and variables that we can't even conceive today or currently. And I think that's really neat. So I wanted to, shed light on that and the fact that, I could understand why clinical trials sound a little, sketchy, right? You're like, well, am I going to be, you know, given something as an experiment? And then I mentioned in the book, by the way, any treatment that's ever recommended in cancer ever, first line, second line, third line, fourth line, only is recommended because it was on a clinical trial that showed that it was better than anything we have today in that setting. So, like that, when you think of it that way, you're like, oh, shoot. So, a clinical trial is the way for me to get the drugs of tomorrow or the treatments. Um, I kind of go over a list of the questions you should ask to kind of vet that process and how you can determine if that trial might be a therapy option, et cetera. So, the things that I would love to spend an hour and a half talking with every patient every day that we can't because people are waiting even 3 weeks to see an oncologist in my city. Um, I wanted to capture it in a book because then you can revisit it and you don't have to play a game of memory and hope that you get it right and all of this stuff that a lot of people experience in the country today.
You talked a little bit about how you started by creating posts on social media and making videos and as a means to getting education out there. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that led you to getting into writing for this book?
Yeah, I think one was really the number of times I was asked on a message or if I ran into somebody in person, like, hey, I've been looking everywhere for that video where you said XYZ or where you explained this or that. And I mean, to be honest, I can't find them either. Like, I wish I'd, categorized them better. But I realized how often things needed to be revisited when it came to a concept, relating to cancer or, a pearl, as they call it in the medical field. And when I realized that, I realized, well, my goodness, how many times do patients probably have questions? Because, in traditional oncology, like if you're going, and using your insurance, you get an hour at your new patient visit. And pretty much every visit after that's like 15 minutes, right? And you're talking about a whole bunch of other things. So chemo education is the same way. It's usually an hour. So I was like, we have got to have this written down and put into a place in a book. And one thing that I didn't do enough, I think on social is really talking about those emotional elements that kids may have. Like, again, what is okay to ask? What's not? A lot of these observations I made, even in people that were caring for people with cancer, like, what could somehow, inadvertently or unintentionally hurt a cancer patient's feelings? Meaning, like, I had patients tell me in private, like, I feel like I'm failing my family. I really don't want treatment, knowing those numbers, but I wouldn't dare say that because my child might think I'm giving up. Like all this weird, I can't say weird. I mean, just justified, unimaginable, uh, you know, psychological component too. And I wanted a section of the book to be safe to be able to consume that information. And oftentimes people don't even know what they want to know or need to hear. And that's another part of it. So the point of or the ability to write it in a book is to say, these are things that you may not have considered, but so you know. And then it can kind of really open the aperture on what to then either read about more or, reset, compass wise in your heart or in your mind, etc. So it's kind of the way I approach my patients and their families. I'm like, let me tell them what is, tell them what isn't, right? So that they can differentiate it from the other stuff they read. Tell them the how, the what, the why, when it's going to get rough and tough, and when it gets smoother, and what the next smaller goals are. And then lastly, you know, at least equip with some kind of navigation assistance on what feelings to explore, to console, what conversations to have, well, that it's okay to not have them, who to go to, potentially if you want to talk about it outside of your home. Just some of the stuff that who knows a 10 or 12-year-old just may not even think to know to seek.
And when it came time to start putting this into a book, was it you that approached a publisher or an editor, or did somebody come to you?
Yeah, it was Macmillan Publishers. They have a subsidiary called Neon Squid, and they said, "Hey, we're trying to attack the subjects that kids may not be able to have access to or understand or know that there's information on." And I saw one. They provided one before that was we need to talk about divorce, and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool!" Like like I just never that thought of the concept for whatever reason that there could be actually a book that talked about navigating this stuff as a child. And when they suggested doing the same thing for cancer, it was kind of a no brainer. Like I would, be honored to because it's an audience that's rarely reached or sadly even thought about when it comes to something so, permeating and so relevant and so, uh, known everywhere you look.
And one last thing that I wanted to touch on was something that you brought up before we began recording, and that was your decision on royalties. Can you go into that decision and what kind of went behind it and what your thinking was?
Yeah, the reason I do social media or did social media a lot with this messaging and with these teachings is because I wanted to democratize is the term we always use, allow people to get the information that can help them. All right. So you're democratizing it to places that may be busy or you can't get information and then also make it accessible. So, people generally have the internet and generally have, Instagram or YouTube, et cetera. So there's the same concept applied to the book. If the charge for the book had to be higher to, satisfy royalties for, an author, but then also the publishing costs and then go to the publisher. It was kind of an easy decision to, make the book as affordable as possible, especially given the audience to just make it more accessible. I would hate that, for somebody not to be able to quote unquote afford the book to have it, when they need to revisit it.
And looking forward, are there any topics that you would like to explore in writing? Are there any plans for writing any future titles?
I've been working on an adult book. In the same manner, which is just like basically like, cancer for the non-medical, just a fun using metaphors, especially around my age. I'm 39 this month. And and we have kind of unique metaphors and pop cultural things that we're used to. So I have stuff where I talk about Star Wars analogies. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but we'll see. So I'm looking at doing something in that capacity because our age group especially is affected a lot, both in diagnosis, but also in our parents as they get older. So I've been, kind of approaching that. And I've also spent just a ton of time now, almost a part career switch into artificial intelligence and seeing how that can be leveraged for the good. I mean, I'm not saying it's all good, but at least when it comes to medicine and healthcare and patients being able to express what they're experiencing, et cetera, I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. So I've been thinking about writing something in that capacity.
And as we close this out, I have a general question that I like to ask as an open-ended way to get your final thoughts. And I see myself having to tailor it specifically to people's specific professions and industries lately. But Dr. Sanjay Juneja, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a doctor or potentially as a writer?
I mean, I just see it. I have this very core belief that has matured, I think, over the last couple of years in my 30s, especially that the world, every experience you get, everything that seems, quote unquote, favorable or fortunate or a blessing, I really think they are all to satisfy a larger purpose that is not inward or in vain. I think when you do that, you're kind of like somewhat in a parasitic way. You're taking from the world that has positioned you with something great. And the only right thing to do is to take, that circumstance and it's given to you because you can amplify it to hopefully ameliorate, improve, or give something to the world or to people. And it's not like a credit thing. It's not like oh, he was, or she was in charge. Like, just do it. Just do anything if you even have the mind to be able to understand something. And on top of that, the ability to write it in paper, write it down in paper or speak it to make sense of it when somebody else couldn't, then that's your, I would argue, your moral obligation to do so because it's like you've been blessed to do that. So like take the stuff that you can do and the experiences you got. My first viral video was silly. It was like a dancing thing like 7 years ago. And it felt so uncomfortable because I'm like, people are following me just like, that's crazy. So I started talking about, at first a little gender inequality in medicine and how, discordant that was compared to my wife's experiences and mine. And then I was like, you know what? I know cancer well. I know blood cancer well. Let's just start using this thing that for whatever reason became a thing to be able to bring it outward. And anyone listening, clearly you're ahead of so much of the population. Like you like education, you read, you're creative, you're right brain. Like, you're listening to a podcast, that's left brained. And so you're already equipped in a position that clearly could, make you a compass for others in ways that you don't even know.
Thank you. That was an interview with Dr. Sanjay Juneja. His debut book, We Need to Talk About Cancer, an important book for patients, family, and friends, is published by Neon Squid and is out now. You can learn more about the We Need to Talk About series and other books by Neon Squid at neonsquid.com. If you appreciate the work being done on this show, there are a number of ways you can show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at BookFairPod. Lastly, you can follow the podcast on patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. Of course, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.